And welcome back to the Country Telegraph. Bronwyn Petrie is a board member for New South Wales Farmers. Now, Mrs. Petrie and her ex-husband, Bill, a fifth-generation farmer, and their son, Tim, breed beef cattle, harvest timber, and run a tourism venture on their 5 family-owned enterprises south of Tenterfield. Bronwyn, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Mike.
I
hope everything works here in Sydney.
Yes, we have launch off. I'm just waiting to hear flight number, and you have to run to the gate. Otherwise, they might leave you behind. And it's so good of you to join us, and I thank you very much. Can you just tell us a brief history about your organisation?
With New South Wales Farmers is a state farming organisation with members across New South Wales, and we have branches across the state and regional representatives who set policy, and of course our annual conference is so important. We also have advisory committees, so I'm chair of the Conservation Resource Management Committee, so we deal with things such as pests and weeds, native vegetation, public land management, mining, etc., and including water, though we also have a water task force. So that's part of my long involvement with native vegetation, and of course we live it on a daily basis up where our farms are near Tenterfield.
New South Wales Farmers published a piece by Nick Savage called Native Vegetation Management, a critical time for critical thinking. What are farmers facing right now throughout New South Wales? What are some of the major issues besides, of course, the obvious, fuel?
Yeah, and it's nice that maybe Minister Bowen might now learn that farmers only use petrol in motorbikes and pumps and chainsaws, and we need diesel, and we're not getting bulk diesel deliveries out on farm, but it is at least flowing to service stations. So in the native vegetation space, it goes back to the introduction of laws back in 1995, and they were onerous, prescriptive, and copped a lot of pushback from farmers because they weren't sensible, weren't practical. We faced 22 years of trying to get the settings right with successive governments and successive ministers. Finally, in 2017, some codes of land management practice came into being, and while still very restrictive, there is some flexibility there to be able to deal with some of the ongoing problems that have caused not just productive issues, but really bad environmental issues, such as the invasive native species. Invasive native species or invasive native scrub is where you get a thickening, an unnatural thickening of bush in open space, and it changes the dynamics altogether. You lose your woodland birds, etc. You end up with no ground covers, and as a result, you get erosion, you get no habitat, etc. So there's a variety of things in those codes. There was a review last year that we're still waiting on the outcome for that, but there were some recommendations there that are quite concerning, such as reducing our 15-year permit time down to 3 years or 7. So that means farmers are really pushed to work very quickly, and they may have to ignore things such as weeds, feral animals, fencing that might need doing. You might have floods or bushfires just to meet that time frame. And local land services is drastically under-resourced, so that's an issue there. Currently, there's also the Natural Resource Commission review of those codes, and we'll be awaiting the outcomes of those. Unfortunately, we're finding, particularly like just recently the Wentworth group report, people are great at looking over the fence on private land and saying how they think this should all be done for public good. Well, farmers, we don't go out to destroy the environment. Every day we want to hand that farm back, onto our kids. As you said, my son is 6th generation, and it's we take great pride that we can combine production and conservation hand in hand. So government interference that restricts that ability and causes perverse environmental outcomes, let alone productive outcomes, is not helpful.
Yeah, I'm intrigued, and New South Wales is not a Robinson Crusoe here. If you look right around Australia, state or federal government, there used to be an ad in the States when I lived there, and there was this old granny, and she says, walking into a hamburger store, "Where's the beef?" Well, in this case, with the government and New South Wales, what's their beef with farmers? And they're not all that friendly. They're not all that supportive to the farming industry. unless they walk into a supermarket a supermarket near Kirralee or near the in North Sydney or somewhere like that. You know how it is, and they haven't got any food. So then they will realise that farmers are not just an afterthought. Farmers, because of food security and the moving forward of this nation, are very, very important. So, what's the beef with state government at the moment with your farmers? I just don't understand that.
Uh, Look, unfortunately, there's some people within the bureaucracies, not necessarily the politicians, but within the bureaucracies, who are still stuck to the ideology of command and control, and they really hated losing some of that control back in 2017 with that code legislation that came in. And we're not communist China. This is a democracy. This is freehold land, etc. And metropolitan people are fabulously supportive, in times of drought, etc. But there's this disconnect, and they're easily influenced by the headlines that go, "Oh, rampant land clearing," without drilling down and finding out that this so-called rampant land clearing is predominantly land management of existing native veg, just like weeding your garden. Over and over and over, you're removing regrowth and thinning, timber out. 60% of that is actually in ground covers, and it's not all native. So the stats are wrong. The message is very emotive. It makes people think that we're clearing the Amazon, and we're not. We're managing land for food and fibre production, and we're also providing habitat and environmental outcomes and good water, all that kind of stuff for the community good as well as our own. And unfortunately, with the drift to the cities, you don't have people necessarily going out on farms like they used to and understanding food and fibre production as in years past. So we've got to sell that message to people so they have a better understanding and not to believe the dramatic headlines.
What advice are you giving to your members? Because, I mean, the last thing they want, and it happens all the time, has been happening since Adam was a boy, but state or federal government loves giving advice from the bureaucrats on how you should manage your acreage, your land, and they have got no idea. I mean, the closest most of those have come to some veggies or a sheep or whatever is at a fairly toffee restaurant or a McDonald's hamburger joint, because they don't know much about it, do they? They don't know, yet they're willing to put their beak into a farmer's life and tell them how to run their piece of land. Very frustrating. So, what advice do you give those then to the guys, people on the land? I mean, do you say stock up your 12 gauge? Do you say stock up your 12 gauge? Have that ready? I don't know.
No, we don't do that. And we certainly don't have belt-fed shotguns, which do not exist but are currently banned in the new legislation. They do exist in some war games on the computer, but certainly not in real life.
Oh, that's right. Of course not.
That's a different story. So we want our farmer members to tell the story. At the moment, get me photos of what they're dealing with. So that we can get those to the people in the decision makers who don't understand because they haven't been out there, they have not seen it firsthand. And you can't be green if you're in the red. And I remember being on committees, and some people thought that we lie awake at night deciding what tree we're going to kill the next day. It's just so absurd with the reality of life on the land. And we have to get that message across. We need that advocacy. We need people to join New South Wales farmers so that we can get that word into the decision makers and in fact to the community so they have a better understanding of what happens out in the food and fibre production of this state and indeed Australia, because it is so important. As we've just seen recently, we are an island. We have to be more self-sufficient. Look, I can remember one day one of the bureaucrats said, "Oh, look, we want all riparian areas fenced off, creeks, rivers, everything." I said, "Well, how are the native animals going to get water?" And they said, "Oh, they'll get it from the troughs." And I said, "How's an echidna going to get up into a trough and have a drink?" "Oh, I hadn't thought about that." It's this impracticality with some of it, and it's a lack of experience. And I remember I worked with timber communities for a while, and we used to take Canberra bureaucrats out to see what happens in the forest. It was a complete eye-opener to bureaucrats to actually see firsthand what was happening.
It's very sad, isn't it? What about the penalties for native vegetation clearing? I would imagine the government needing a few extra bucks would make those fairly fairly heavy, to say the least. Can you tell us about that? And does it? I mean, it must worry farmers, because if they do what government wants them to do, then they're going to eventually the business will not be sustainable.
It's not just the penalties, and they can be very extreme. So, actually, you have to prove yourself innocent. So we're far worse off. Farmers are worse off than murderers and pedophiles, because we don't have innocent until proven guilty. We have to prove that we are actually innocent. Not only that, it's then a criminal record. That means you can't do things such as be justice of peace, be on council, etc., etc. But the other thing that's happened just recently with the changes brought in the federal government with the Environment Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act, we've got legal removal of invasive native species in the western areas. That's really expensive to do this, but you have to do it if you don't want to have your land destroyed. Where some farmers have been issued a stop work order from the federal government, even though they've got the legal permit, and told that they've got to quarantine that land for 20 years. So it's just going to come up thicker than ever. Because there's seems to be no right of appeal. There's been no conversation with the state government officers to say, well, why were these permits issued? Because even though it's different legislation, I do know that local land services are really diligent when they do issue those permits. So there's just this quagmire of uncertainty that's happening as a result of that. So but the penalties are really very high. Interestingly, if you clear a hectare of certain vegetation, you've got a $20,000 penalty per hectare. But if you sign up to protect that in perpetuity on your land title, you get something like $100. So there's a complete reversal of value depending on the activity. So if you can, why isn't it equivalent?
I go back to my original thing, 12 gauge shotgun. But anyway, that's, they don't really hurt anyway. They just give you a sting in the bum. Yeah. Just tell us quickly your thoughts on the Wentworth Group, which involves Professor Tim Flannery, who said that Brisbane will be the first major city in the Western world that will run out of water. And that same year we had massive floods, who also bought, because of the rising water levels around the world, he also bought a house on the water. So he's not a very sincere person. It's more of opportunity. And I would see that the Wentworth Group probably, most likely is a group full of people that are there for opportunity. What would you say to them?
He also said that we'd never see dams full again. And of course,
That's
we're
right.
into those bad floods. Don't forget that one. But, there are... Remembering the Wentworth Group was formed because they met in the Wentworth Hotel and decided to, in Sydney, and decided to form a group. There are some very reputable scientists in the Wentworth Group, including one who was previously Dr. Neil Byron, who did the 2014 independent review into native vegetation legislation in New South Wales, where he clearly identified that the laws had failed biodiversity, failed farmers, and had to change. And that was the genesis of the new legislation. However, we have other people like Ken Henry, etc., who are just saying, oh, we've got to save the world, we've got to lock up all the farms, they've got to, the farmers have to provide all this public good. At the same time, we've got public land where millions and millions of animals were incinerated in those fires due to very high Armageddon fuel loads. You've got to walk the talk. And it's all very well to be in ivory towers and ignore what is really happening. As I said, we're not communist China. Farmers need to be able to produce food and fibre for this nation and also for our exports. Our Premier, Chris Minns, said at our conference last year, he is looking to agriculture to help replace the coal royalties that they're going to lose in years to come, the 44 billion. So he's looking at 30 billion of that coming from agriculture. Agriculture needs to be successful. We need, in this cost of living crisis, we need to be able to produce efficient food, and food, you don't grow wheat, etc., under trees, and you certainly don't grow it where trees have invaded what were previously very open areas. So I think it's all very well to hop up and spout all this ideology, but not actually grapple with the reality of it, and somehow think that this is just all going to be great and the farmers are going to be able to afford to stay on the land. Unlike South Australia, who years ago were compensated for when their native vegetation was sort of taken by the state. This farmers, particularly in Queensland and New South Wales, they paid the price for Kyoto. That's the only reason Australia met its Kyoto targets, was on the back of the native vegetation of the farmers in Queensland and New South Wales, with no compensation whatsoever, and that meant that everyone else in society did not have to pay massively increased electricity prices or transport prices or anything like that. And that to us was theft, absolute theft of an asset which is on title. So get very frustrated when desk-bound academics create all this great ideas for saving the world, when they're really not saving the world at all. It's the farmers out there on the land who are saving the world.
Well, the farmer is and has to be a great conservationist, has to be one that looks after the environment, because if they don't make any money. And really interesting, we had a guy on last week talking about fertiliser, and he does a very natural fertiliser. And he was talking to, and this is how things change. He was talking to this farmer who says, I use your stuff on my garden and it really goes great. And because he was whinging also, this farmer, about his crop wasn't all that great. And this fellow who runs this fertiliser company said, well, it's odd that you use this great fertiliser, which is natural, on your garden, and it's going at fantastic speed, yet you're using an inferior fertiliser on the stuff that keeps the roof on your head. Shouldn't that be the other way around? And it probably should be. Farmers are always evolving. They are looking at ways not to destroy the planet, not like the governments who want to destroy the planet to save it. They have to make sure that they look after the land they're on, because once it's gone, it's very hard to bring back. Bronwyn, it's always a pleasure to have you on. I have to say, this is the first time, but I would love to do more of this, because I think there's many, many issues that we need to look at. I think farming has become so complex, and most of that, in my humble opinion, is government-led. And I think we need to make sure that farmers are looked after, because they do a tough job. To get up in the morning early and to finish late at night, and to work, because my dad was a farmer, and to see that Mother Nature could turn against you in an instant. And what you have to do is get up again and fix it and look forward to the next year. So it's a great life, but it's a very, very tough life too. And I think we need to show farmers and rural and outback communities that we do love them, and they are important for this country to move forward. If somebody wants to get hold of you, Bronwyn, or your organisation, how do they do that?
New South Wales Farmers is listed, but look, my own email is petrieb@newsouthwalesfarmers.org.au. By all means, reach out, tell me your story. Give me your examples of what invasive native scrub is doing to your properties and to the environment. As you said, farmers are great innovators. Zero-till farming changed so much with soil health, and it is a hard life. I remember my father-in-law, a new doctor, came along and he said, "Oh, you'd be retired now," and he went, "Oh, what's retirement?" But that's how it is. But there has been overclearing, but that has been actually at government behest. When leases were first taken up, they were told to clear down to 5%. Farmers actually had to fight to keep what they saw as good quality trees, etc. But we have big open plains, we have open woodlands, etc., doing grazing, and of course you can't grow crops except in open country. So it's a mixture of both. and we have to do the best we can to have the best practices, implement those, and grow really good food, really good fibre, and keep this country rolling along. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, fantastic. Have a great flight. Thank you so much for your time.
Well.